Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. We are in the knockout stages of the 2022 World Cup. I have really been enjoying a number of the matches. There have been some delightful surprises, and I had so much fun doing the Literary World Cup book tag for the USA a couple weeks ago that I wanted to do another version. Now, I'm still planning to do one for the nation whose team wins this edition of the World Cup. 11 writers that I've read something from that nation. And that should be a fun challenge. We'll see how it works out. But I wanted to do another edition as well. And I wanted to try and put together a starting 11 from writers who come from nations who were eliminated after the group stage of the World Cup. These are nations whose teams have gone home. Many of them, really accomplished something. They have much to be proud of. And so let's try and identify 11 writers. I'm also going to try and identify at least one specific work that you could read. Maybe you can find it at the library that I've really enjoyed. And I'll note, though, that there's one or two countries who I couldn't recall anyone from that nation that I've read a book from. So I'll need some suggestions in the comments for some future reading on my part. But we're going to start at the back with a goalkeeper, and we're going with Canada and the great writer Nalo Hopkinson. Now, Hopkinson is a science fiction writer, a speculative fiction writer. The reason I would put her at the back is because the goalkeeper has to be able to see what's going on at all times. And Hopkinson, in her works in science fiction, uses some really intricate plotting. She deconstructs science fiction archetypes, even science fiction like subgenres. Really does some interesting stuff. She fuses that with so much of her own experience and background as being part of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. And so her ability as a writer to keep track of all of that suggests that she would be able to keep track of the play going on and be a solid goalkeeper. Now, if you're looking for a good place to start with Nalo Hopkinson, I would recommend Brown Girl in the Ring. I read that this year. I'll link the description. I'll link the video in the description notes. So that's who I'd have at the back as my goalkeeper. Now, for the center defenders, the center backs. Again, you want someone who's very strong. And so I've picked one person as a center back, Inger Christensen from Denmark. I read her book, The Condition of Secrecy, last summer as part of our Euro Cup challenge. That was recommended to me by the great Elizabeth over at Bookish North. And she has all sorts of great recommendations from Norway or Denmark or Scandinavian countries. But The Condition of Secrecy was an incredible collection of essays. But the reason I would want Christensen back there is she's not only an essayist, she's also a poet. She just has so many different things she can do. And so back there, she's not just defending, she's also getting forward on a set piece. She can get that strong header and maybe be the one playing the ball up through the middle into the midfield. So that's why I'd have Christensen back there. Now, my other center back, excuse me, would be the great anonymous Welsh writer or writers in the Mabinogion. Now, if you've never read the Mabinogion, I'm sure there's a library. If you live in any metropolitan area, there's going to be a library that has a copy of it. You might really enjoy it. If you enjoy fantasy, if you enjoy just like really weird, interesting, strange imagery, please check out the Mabinogion. Folks who are into medieval works. This is like an early medieval work, mid-medieval work that draws on sort of like Welsh legendary. And mythology, and it's a fascinating work. I believe it's anonymous, but it comes from Wales. So for the Red Dragons, check out the Mabinogion. And put that, imagine that at the back of your defense. There's all sorts of wild things going on. You want something that can just respond to any possible situation. Now, our other defenders for the fullbacks, I noted in my USA version of this tag that I want folks can stick the dagger in, who are just deadly. And so as writers, the first one who came to mind was the great Horacio Quiroga from Uruguay. Now, having read Eduardo Galeano, who's also from Uruguay this year, he nearly took the spot. But I wanted to honor the fact that Uruguay's World Cup championships all come up through 1950. And I do say championships plural. They've got more than one star on that jersey. And so I wanted an Uruguayan writer who was working a long time ago. So I went with Quiroga. Horacio Quiroga wrote a number of short stories that are absolutely horrifying. And the images he conjures, the pain and punishment that he conjures in those stories is what he might be able to inflict on an opposing player. His story, The Decapitated Chicken, is probably the most famous of his stories, but he has a number of other stories that are just absolutely fantastic. University of Texas Press published a series of translations, I believe, by the great Margaret Sayers Payton. I want to say 40, 50 years ago. And that I have a used edition of that. I would highly recommend checking out Quiroga. There might even be translations of his stories available for free online. My other fullback is going to be the great Ama-Ata Edu from Ghana. And I would say that if you're looking for a book from her, it would be Our Sister Killjoy. It's an excellent book. It's an excellent sort of portrait and exploration of sort of being in the middle class or looking in on the middle class, people who want to be in the middle class, in that not just that African experience, but the conflict that exists in the aftermath of decolonization and colonialism. And Ama-Ata Edu has written a number of very good books, but that's probably her strongest book. It's one I highly recommend. Do Right by the Black Stars. All right. But yeah, Our Sister Killjoy. And I mean, with a title like that, she's going to kill the joy of the other team. Come on. All right. So we're moving into midfield now. We've got our four at the back. We've got our goalkeeper. We're moving into midfield. For my defensive midfielder, I decided to go with Ali al-Duagi from Tunisia. And his, I think the only work of his that's been translated in English is a series of his short stories that's actually his and not like a poem or a short story that's in an anthology. I believe the only collection of his is the anthology Sleepless Nights. It can be tough to find. You might be better off like finding that at a university library. But he was like a fascinating just person in life. He was super prolific. He was also very active in sort of the nascent development of not only Tunisia as a nation, but also as sort of a literary culture. And he was very active on both those fronts. And so sort of as a defensive midfielder, he can sort of hold that line there. He's the first step in the creation of something new. And so Ali al-Duagi from Tunisia is our defensive midfielder. And again, check out Sleepless Nights. Moving up deeper into midfield now, I want my maestro. I want someone who has total control. I want someone who can use language that moves in every direction, that is as detailed, as specific, as marvelous as possible. This is my passer, my creator. And so I'm going with the great Fakhreddin Gorgani from Iran. Now, I love Persian poetry. There is such a long continuity in Iranian or Persian culture going through numerous centuries, even though there would be political changes and dynastic changes and even like massive religious overhauls when Iran shifts from being a Zoroastrian nation into a Muslim nation. There is this deep sense of cultural continuity. And so the many of the writers who are writing in the aftermath of the Muslim conquest and conversion will draw on Persian and Parthian and Sasanian legends and stories and tales and explore them in all this wonderful detail. And Gorgani is one of the best at that. I love those different writers. He's probably my favorite of them. His book Vis and Ramin is really the only extant work we have from him. It is an absolute masterpiece, particularly if you're reading in English. The translation by Dick Davis, cannot recommend it highly enough. So that's who I'd have in my midfield. He leans into that sort of Persian side of just building these marvelous tapestries of language that have all sorts of plant motifs and vines. And if you think of that type of growth, now imagine that person being able to be the creator and pass the ball just wherever they want on the field. That's why we've got Gorgani in the center there. And now my attacking midfielder is going to be a wonderful writer from Ecuador, a writer who is still alive today, is working currently. Far cry from Gorgani, who's been gone from us for half a millennium at this point. But from Ecuador, we're going to go with Gabriela Alemán. And if you've never read any of her works, see if you can find a copy of Pozo Wells or at a library again, or just try to find a copy. It's a very funny work that's also deadly serious. It looks at political destabilization, environmental destruction in South America, the ways that there can be local individuals don't necessarily have control over what they want to have control over. And so it's exploring all of those themes in sort of from this thriller perspective. And yet, she has such a brutal sense of humor. Aleman, it is, her work is, Poso Wells is one of the funniest books I've read in the past 10 years. While also being one of the saddest, darkest books. She is willing to look, the truth and the violence of the truth straight in the eye, and also be able to smirk as she stares it down. And so Poso Wells, the opening 15-20 pages involve a death of someone who maybe isn't a great person, but seems to be a great person, and then more is revealed, that is almost hysterical and yet also horrifying. So Poso Wells, check that one out. And she's my attacking midfielder because she can, stare the defense straight in the eye and then just tear it apart the way she does, societies that are corrupt. So that's what I have as my attacking midfielder. Moving up into my front line now, my forwards. On the wing, I have the writer of one of the great books I've read recently, and that is Calixte Biala from Cameroon, whose book, The Sun Hath Looked Upon Me, is up there with Vicente Ramin as one of the finest books I read this year. I was legitimately shocked at how powerful I found the book, how authentic I found it, how just sincere and deeply moving I found it. It is a short book. It is a quick read, so I want a quick player. And again, it is it is a book that is willing to be aggressive towards aggressors. It's a book that is willing, Biala is willing to really call out the very deep veins of misogyny that she had encountered, that her friends, her family, the women around her were also encountering. And yes, it's in Cameroon, but it's also something that sadly is deeply relevant today, and not just to African culture, but around the world. So Biala would be on my wing, cutting in. Now I want a second striker for this one. I want someone like Dennis Bergkamp in this lineup. I know last time I kind of went with a 4-3-3, a little more traditional crossing. I want a second striker. I want a little magician who's going to do something nobody's ever thought of. And so from Mexico, we're calling up Juan Rulfo. His book Pedro Páramo is a masterpiece. It is bizarre. It is deeply strange, and yet it is an incredibly effective work, again, in such a short capacity. He also has a great book of short stories, The Burning Plain. There are different titles for that, depending on the translation, but the copy I have is The Burning Plain. Those stories are nearly as powerful as Pedro Páramo. So when I think of a player, a writer who's going to do something marvelous, something that no one's ever really thought of, Juan Rulfo is someone who comes to mind. So he would be in that position. And then at my center forward, I'm calling up somebody from Germany. I can't believe they're out. Not necessarily sad that they're out. But we're going to call up someone from Germany. I thought very seriously about Goethe. Just a magnificent, majestic person up front to just head the ball in as a poacher. But I just can't see him working with everybody on the team. So I've decided to call up Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, again, maybe he's not going to work with the team either, but maybe he'll just be aggressive enough. He'll be crafty enough to just take the shot that's given to him. That he's not going to waste his time. He's going to have a will to power of some sort. And sure, it might be a disaster, but we can always sub him off if he gets carded, as he did in the Philosophers World Cup. If you know, you know, and if you don't, I'll link a video in the description box so you might want to check out below my recommendation for Nietzsche. Now, in terms of which of his works to read, that could be a little tougher. Beyond Good and Evil, in terms of the aphorisms, some of those can be really quite interesting. But I think most would steer towards Thus Spake Zarathustra. But if you disagree, just let me know which of Nietzsche's works you think is a great place to start with. But he would be my striker up front, representing us not just in this literary World Cup, a book tag, but also from the Philosopher's World Cup. Now, I would have one super sub, and it's someone I read for this World Cup. It's Carmen Naranjo from Costa Rica. And she's had a number of short stories. Generally, what I've been able to find is there are at least 2 anthologies that are published here in the US, I imagine probably in English-speaking countries. One was Modern Libraries Latin American women short story writers. And then there was another one that was a Central American anthology that was smaller, didn't have as many stories. But she was represented in both, and very good short story writer. So that's my super sub. If Nietzsche gets carded or just turns into a disaster and has a meltdown, then we're bringing her in. She'll finish the job for us. Now, who's coaching this team? Well, I decided I would have Georges Simenon from Belgium coach the team because he used to set all sorts of weird challenges for himself, and I could see him doing that like with the players. Like, hey, your weird challenge for the next 5 minutes, I need you to try this. I'm going to send you in as a sub for 15 minutes. Here's what I need from you. We're going to start the game in this way. Here's what we need in the first 15 minutes. So I could see him doing that, and I'm also shocked Belgium's out already. Now, finally, there was one writer I've read where the work was originally written and published, if that's the right word, in Saudi Arabia. But it felt weird to include the writer. I'll simply say that I think that Tarif Khalidi's translation of the Quran, which came out of Saudi Arabia, is a masterful translation. I did a video on that about 2 years ago. I'll link that in the description box as well. But it just would have felt weird. So if you have another writer from Saudi Arabia that you would recommend that I read, please let me know in the comments. I also could not think of a single writer from Serbia. Legitimately, I was looking through, I looked at some lists of Serbian writers. I'm not familiar with any of them. I couldn't even find like a short story writer I had come across. So please give me recommendations on Serbian writers. And then finally, I'm not familiar with any writers from Qatar. So if anyone could give a recommendation for that, I'd be more than happy to check it out. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you have any quibbles with my team selection. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Thank you.